You know what I realized when I was watching all these movies? He was never really in any of them, you know? I mean, you never really see his face. Like, he says things sometimes, look this way, stand in front of this thing, say something to the camera. And so you hear him, and you see everything he sees, but he's never really there in the picture. He used to take us to the wax museum all the time, and every time it was just about the same. And then when he got the camera, he'd bring it along, filming all the statues, life-size and still. All the movie stars would be posed in the freeze frame of their most famous films. Dorothy and the Tin Man near the Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow, positioned like they're skipping down the yellow brick road away from Emerald City, arms linked. Toto, too, at their feet. And a big scenic painting behind them, lit with green lights. More spotlights aimed at their waxy, shiny faces. And Somewhere Over the Rainbow would play on a loop. And in the next room, all the best comedy guys were standing there, frozen in slapstick. Laurel and Hardy, W.C. Fields, Chaplin, all propped up inside a replica of a set that generally looked close to the kinds of sets they used in their films, wooden, plain, rickety. All captured in mid-folly, a pending eye poke under a falling bucket of water, climbing up a broken ladder. And around the corner was a house of horrors, and a sign hung just next to the red curtain you had to walk through, warning that anyone faint of heart shouldn't enter. In each tableau, down that dark hallway, wax bodies were posed in various scenes of horror film, torture, and gore. But the best part of it was how serious it took itself, you know? That the statues tried really hard to make you feel like you were in the film, peering into the scene secretly, like you caught them in the act of acting. And you know someone worked really hard to make all those statues look real, painting their faces carefully, stitching together the costumes. But always, if you looked closely, you'd see a limb was just about ready to fall off, or the paint on their chin was peeling. Maybe the pupil of an eye was pointed slightly toward the ground while the other stared into the distance. And when we went to the wax museum, he'd get all this on tape. And he was a terrible cameraman. He'd see something like a butterfly and think it was the most amazing thing to video, and he'd follow it around for like 20 fucking minutes, up and down, trying to keep up with this butterfly. And at the museum, he'd always think it was really important to film the front of the building. The displays, the kiosk, making sure he documented the ticket prices, the posters on the windows, so, you could see Clint Eastwood's serious cowboy face staring out onto the boulevard, or Mike Tyson all muscly, posed with his hands on his hips, wrapped up in tape, a towel around his neck like he just got finished pummeling some poor guy. And we'd be in the shot too, but just sort of wandering in and out of the frame, like the butterfly. He didn't really rest the camera on us too much. Now, he'd spend all kinds of time making sure we were able to look at that video 100 years later and know exactly where we were. We were at the Wax Museum. He loved it there, and he loved the movies. Maybe that's why we went there all the time. He really knew how to talk about the movies, even if he couldn't talk about anything else. And he'd always point out who was who, which movie stars were most important, telling us what their best films were and why. In the video, he makes sure that the lens catches all the stars on the sidewalk, each one. So you see the name, at least for a second, while we walked from the car. And when we get up to the front of the building, there he goes, scanning the facade. And back then, the front of the museum looked really different, They had these big glass windows with those posters I told you about, and on the left side, when you're facing it, there's a little ticket window. The clerk would speak into a microphone, and ask you what you wanted. Give me 4 tickets, please, 2 adults and 2 children. Infants are free. And they'd pass the paper tickets to you through a little opening under the glass and hand you a brochure with a list of all the statues. In the video, you can see my reflection in the window, jumping around. I was excited, I love the Wax Museum too. And then for a few seconds, the camera passes the whole surface of the glass, tracing the images of other folks milling around, my sisters, passing cars, and it lands there for a moment on his reflection. And in that time, you start to believe that he was there too.